Welcome back. As we were talking about Dean Mohammed's travels, it's again important to look at what he talks about in the second paragraph. Though I acknowledge that I am incapable of doing justice to the endeavor that I have taken, why I am doing so? He is doing so because he is trying to gratify wishes of his readers. So, what he is trying to assert here is that his audience is asking, urging for such a sincere depiction. Probably there is a hint and a pot shot that is taken at all the European representation of India at this point of time, that the readers really wanted to know what a native thinks of his own country. The earnest entreaties of some friends and the liberal encouragement of some others to whom I express my acknowledgement, I allow are the secondary motives. The primary motive is that I wanted to gratify your wishes, that you tell us about your country. And it is very important, that's why that he establishes the genuineness of his authorial voice. Again, something that is part of the travelogue itself. But let's think about a travelogue that we are most familiar with, in a sense, Robinson Crusoe. If we take Robinson Crusoe to be the typical kind of a travelogue, it begins with a sad departure, that they are unhappy there. Somehow they have to leave. If you remember, Robinson Crusoe complains that like he's actually the middle son, so he does not get anything in that sense. His fortunes of his father are reserved for the eldest one. So that's why he's not happy and he has to look for something to be done. So he's not actually really satisfied with the station in his life. So therefore, he does not have a fulfilling life here. So that's why he has to leave. So sad departure is one of the first like points to remember in a typical travelogue. Then, if one remembers, then he leaves the country and then has a moment of shipwreck. So, the sad departure then begins adventures, sometimes extraordinary kind of adventures. If you remember again, another travelogue that is very popular at this point from this time will be Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, right? Again, Gulliver leaves the country because of certain kind of sad circumstances. Again, some kind of a disaffection with his society and station in his life, leaves and has adventures. Extraordinary kind of adventures, Robinson Crusoe and Jonathan Swift's. If you look at Gulliver's extraordinary adventures, in case of Crusoe, he experiences shipwreck, goes to an island which is not inhabited, and then faces great difficulty, overcomes them, and then finally makes those places inhabitable. He starts cultivating there, he has a boundary there, he becomes the lord of the place in that way. Ultimate colonial venture itself, right? One of the reasons why in the last class I was talking to you about the colonial undertones of travelogue itself. The travels are also strategies of colonial domination, especially the domination of knowledge. So, You overcome great difficulty and then you domesticate the space. In Robinson Crusoe, it's very straightforward. In Gulliver's Travels, it takes a bit of a complicated route because though Gulliver each time overcomes the difficulty in a different land, he is not clearly able to domesticate that space entirely. He is not able to domesticate the space entirely. At the end of it, when he comes back from the land of Hohenhums, the horses, it's actually he is the one who is domesticated in a sense because he does not like England when he comes back to it. He hates people and it takes a very different route. One can also read it in other ways, but in Robinson Crusoe, it's a direct and almost a straightforward exploration of colonialism in that sense, domesticates the space. And then finally, even though he has found this land and he's given it his own stamp, he wants to return and he returns happy. Now, if we look at all these tropes of what I am writing on the board, if we look at all these tropes of travel writing, a sad departure, an adventure, then one overcomes difficulty, then domesticates space, and then returns happy. Obviously, there are variations as I showed you in case of Gulliver's Travels, but if one reads a typical travelogue at this point of time, you will find all these elements there. Along with it, there will be very a typical travelogue because we are talking about a literary manifestation of it in Robinson Crusoe. One might see a lot more of information about oneself, but a typical travelogue here will have elements of sad departure, adventure, and a happy return if it is a historical document, like many of the documents that are present at this point of time. At least you will have these three elements because Robinson Crusoe is a literary exploration. That's why you have extended deliberations on the self, which is not part of a historical document. So, in the historical document, like the one that Dean Mohammed is probably aiming for, one does not see a lot of descriptions of the self. One does not see a lot of description of the self. One sees a amount of almost disinclination to explore interiority, which therefore stops it from becoming an autobiography and retains its generic purity as a travelogue. So you get on the other hand, you get lot of details, advices, of practical nature, which then tell obviously the future travelers as to what to expect, what to get, and what is good here, bad here, and if there are any dangers to be paid attention to, and how can you make this journey smoother next time, which is where the colonial aspect comes in, right? That like what can the future travelers or future administrators, if they are coming to India, what can they expect in this part of the country, right? So, if one sees this, then one can see the deviation that Dean Mohammed has in his account. So, he does not depart sadly, though he is separated from his parents at the age of 11. There is no sad departure as we will look at. Adventures, I don't know how much of it we can call adventures, or is written in those kinds of lines. He obviously participates and he goes from places to places because he is part of the colonial army. And there is no happy return because he leaves India and he goes to settle down in the United Kingdom. So he is not coming back like Robinson Crusoe or a Gulliver back to his native place. So in the template of travelogue, Deen Mohammed's travelogue does not fit. Muhammad's travels are unique in that sense. And one of the reasons why I ended in the last class by saying that it's a counter discourse is because of this reason. The reason is that you see that he is violating what are the available discourses itself, even when he is participating. And this we will see at various levels happening in the generic expectations, in the content of the travelogue, and also in the form that he is using to discuss these things. So, as we have already highlighted, he's marked a difference between the Europeans and the British themselves. In the first paragraph, and if we read on, you will see that he makes it much more evident. So, the people of India in general are peculiarly favored by Providence in the possession of all that can cheer the mind and allure the eye. So, it's again like great advertisement for India, that like its poets creative fancy, the traveler with behold admiration the face of the delightful country, and like its gardens are beautifully diversified and the fragrance of the air is wonderful, the very bowels of earth enriched with inestimable mines of golds and diamonds. So, what you get to see is that India is a land of God's bounty. In Muhammad's accounts itself, the first letter itself talks about all that, and it's filled with benevolence and goodwill to each other, and it mentions a very important detail here, which is still. The use of the phrase still is quite interesting. Possessed of all that is enviable in life, we are still more happy in the exercise of benevolence and goodwill to each other. Devoid, and as I mentioned earlier, you can see it comes out explicitly, devoid of every species of fraud or low cunning. So, unlike what the British believe of us, we are devoid of every species of fraud and low cunning. We are filled with benevolence and goodwill, even though we have everything that is enviable in life. So, necessarily India is a land of bounty, yes, but also Indians are happy, satisfied, content people. Also, they are benevolent and they help each other out without malice, cunning, or fraud in their mind. This is as emphatic an endorsement of the Indian nature as you would see. As an experiment in my classes, when I teach Indian writing in English at IIT Madras, I ask my students to read British documentations of India, and many of them find this kind of language against Indians being used, that Indians are frauds and filled with low cunning, that the people cannot be trusted, and moreover what they keep highlighting in the British experiences of India is about the land also, that the weather is not hospitable, people are falling sick, this is filled with vegetation. So, almost to take away the beauty of the land. What you see here is that Deen Muhammad reclaims those representational rights. He characterizes India as the land of abundance and marks that the traveler beholds with admiration in the face of this delightful country, and that not only is the land beautiful and filled with God's bounty, but it is possessed of great people. The people do not involve themselves in chicanery. People are hospitable and are good to each other. And one more last thing that he highlights is that in our convivial enjoyments, we are never without our neighbors. Probably taking a pot shot at the British or the European way, individualistic way of life. So, therefore, he highlights that we are never without our neighbors. So, we involve our neighbors in our lives, probably unlike what happens in Europe. And you can see these first 3 paragraphs itself, 4 paragraphs to be precise, set the tone for the travelogue, where the travelogue sets up a counter discourse, as I was talking about, where it destabilizes the European representation of India. And it's not as if he is not talking in glorious terms about Europe, as will be evident in the last one, but he is also careful to mark the superiority of Indians, which is quite a political statement to make, even in places where he probably thinks that we might lack. He makes those sincere admissions, but he also highlights that it's a work in progress in that sense. Example of this will be our women, though not as accomplished as those of Europe, are still very engaging for many virtues that exalt the sex. So, even though our women are not as accomplished or as probably intellectually capable at this point of time, they are engaging for many virtues that exalt the sex. So, in no way he claims the inferiority, even though the tone is servile probably, but he does not accept inferiority in that way. So, what he does is, like as I said, in a typical British documentation of India, he subverts what would be a column on those British documents called the manners of people. He gives a great account of India as a place and their own people. From there, as I said, you will see that he gives his his life history, and he describes how he ended up with Godfrey Evan Baker. I was about 11 years old when deprived of my father, and though children are seldom possessed of much sensibility or reflection at such an immature age, yet I recollect well no incident of my life ever made so deep an impression of myself on my mind. As he was a Mohammedan, he was interred with pomp and ceremony, usually on the occasion. I remained with my mother sometime after and acquired a little education at a school in Patna, and then after that he happens to come across this British official called Godfrey Evans, and after that as he would recount, he wanted to join desperately, and this is very different from the sad departure that we were talking about in terms of a traditional travelogue itself. Like, nothing could exceed my ambition of leading a soldier's life. The notion of carrying arms, living in a camp could not be easily removed. My fond mother's entreaties were of no avail. I grew anxious for the moment that would bring the military officers by our door. Whenever I perceived their route, I would instantly follow them, sometimes to the Raja's place where I had free access, sometimes to a fine tennis court generally frequented by them in the evening, which was built by Colonel Champion at the back of his house in an open square. Here among the gentlemen, I one day discovered Mr. Baker, and often passed by him in order to attract his attention. He at last took particular notice of me, observing that I surveyed him with a kind of secret satisfaction, and in a very friendly manner asked me how would I like living with Europeans. This unexpected encouragement, as it flattered my hopes beyond expression, occasioned a sudden reply. I therefore told him with eager joy how happy he could make me by taking me with him. He seemed very much pleased with me, and assuring me of his future kindness, hoped I would merit it. And then what happens is, like, he leaves by the precipitate death of my father. She had still means of left living comfortable manner and providing for both her wants and mine. Mother was given some 400 rupees, which was a princely sum at this point of time, and he leaves with leaving my mother to lament my departure, as Bankipur is but a few miles from Patna. We shortly arrived there that morning, and he joins the cavalry there. So, we don't have an account where he is sadly leaving. He is, on the other hand, excited, bordering on passionate, talking about the military in that sense. So, we don't have the typical characteristics of the travelogue. He tells us, obviously giving many details of the company settlements around Patna and how the company's lifestyle is, which is drawn from the travelogue itself. As you see the details that are mentioned here, that where is the tennis court? The tennis court is made in such a space which is what is called Mir Afzal Ka Bagh, and who are the gentlemen who play tennis and all those kinds of details. So, you see a very graded participation in the colonial discourses while constructing his own response here. And that is the uniqueness of his account. If we go on to see, and then this will be highlighted more and more in as we go through the account itself. If we keep reading the account, you will see more and more examples where he again participates as well as distances himself from colonial documentations, colonial travelogues. The counter discourse becomes much and much more highlighted. Thank you.